On a dark early morning in April of 2018, the streets of Ross Township, Pennsylvania, were almost empty. It was the kind of quiet that only exists before sunrise, when the world hasn't fully woken up. At 5:30 that morning, Thomas Sullivan was walking across the road. A pickup truck came through, and in a matter of seconds, everything ended. Johnny Valiant was gone. The man who had lived life on the biggest stages and transformed himself time and time again left this world not in an arena, not under the bright lights, but on an ordinary street. His death was sudden, tragic, and completely out of his control. But the life that led up to that moment was anything but ordinary, and you deserve to know all about it. Thomas Sullivan started out in Pittsburgh. That city would matter to him in so many ways, not just because he was born and raised there, but also because it was the city of Bruno Sammartino, one of the greatest wrestling heroes of all time. Bruno was like a local legend, and Sullivan sought out his advice when he decided he wanted to chase wrestling. Bruno pointed him toward the right people, and before long, Sullivan was in Detroit, breaking into the rough and unforgiving world of territorial wrestling. In those early days, he wasn't just a wrestler. He did everything. He refereed matches, he helped set up rings, and he learned the business from every angle. That was how it worked back then. You didn't walk in and expect to be a star overnight. You paid your dues. His training came under the guidance of Al Costello, a member of the famous Kangaroos tag team. Costello taught him not just the technical side of wrestling, but also the toughness needed to survive in it. By the late 60s, Sullivan was wrestling for the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, the company that would eventually become WWE. He wrestled under the name John L. Sullivan, and while he wasn't a main event star, he was good enough to regularly face top villains like Killer Kowalski and Toru Tanaka. Fans might not have rushed to buy tickets just to see him, but he was carving out a solid spot for himself. Then came the moment that changed everything. While wrestling in Ontario, he met another wrestler, Jimmy Valiant. Jimmy had a big personality, and when he looked at Sullivan, he saw potential. Together, they created the act that would change Sullivan's life. He bleached his hair, adopted the name Johnny Valiant, and joined Jimmy as one half of the Valiant brothers. The Valiants weren't just a tag team. They were loud, they were flashy, and they were completely different from the rugged, no-nonsense wrestlers who had dominated before them. With their blonde hair, cocky strut, and larger-than-life attitude, they stood out immediately. People either loved them or hated them, but no one ignored them. They were showmen as much as wrestlers, and in many ways they were ahead of their time. Their success came fast. They won tag team titles in the World Wrestling Association by beating none other than Dick the Bruiser and Bruno Sammartino, two of the biggest names around. And then in 1974, they made history in the WWF by winning the World Tag Team Championship from Tony Garea and Dean Ho. They didn't just win the belts. They held on to them for over a year, 370 days to be exact, which was almost unheard of at the time. Fans hated them so much that they couldn't wait to see them lose, and that was exactly why the company kept the titles on them for so long. They were doing their job perfectly. The Valiants became one of the most celebrated teams of the 70s. In 1974, Pro Wrestling Illustrated named them Tag Team of the Year, and to this day, people still call them the best team of that decade. Later on, Johnny even teamed up with another brother, Jerry Valiant, and with Lou Albano in their corner, they won the WWF Tag Team Championship again in 1979. But Johnny's secret weapon wasn't just that he could wrestle, it was that he could adapt. He knew when it was time to move on from being inside the ring. When his days as an active wrestler were winding down, he stepped into a new role as a manager. Suddenly, he wasn't the one taking the bumps, but he was still in the spotlight, running his mouth, causing trouble, and helping other wrestlers shine. Being a manager let him extend his career and stay relevant at a time when a lot of his peers were fading away. Even after his time in wrestling started to slow down, Johnny didn't just sit around. He had the personality for more, and he went for it. He got into acting and comedy. On stage in a comedy club, he was still Johnny Valiant in a way. The timing, the storytelling, the way he could grab a room's attention. He also landed small acting gigs, proving once again that he could keep finding new ways to perform. When Johnny Valiant stopped wrestling, he didn't just walk away. A lot of wrestlers fade out once their bodies can't take it anymore. Some hang on too long and get stuck in the past. Johnny was different. He knew how to shift gears. He understood that his mouth was just as powerful as his moves in the ring. He had the gift of gab, and that gift kept him in the spotlight. So he became a manager. Now, manager might sound like someone in a suit keeping track of contracts, but in wrestling, a manager is more like a hype man. They walk their wrestlers to the ring, run their mouths, stir up trouble, and get the fans yelling. Johnny was perfect for it. He knew how to rile up a crowd just by talking. He didn't need to wrestle anymore. His words and swagger did the work. One of his first jobs was managing Hulk Hogan in the AWA back in 1981. This was before Hogan turned into the biggest star in wrestling. Back then, Hogan was still figuring himself out. Johnny standing in his corner gave him a boost, even if it was short-lived. Hogan went on to become a global icon, but Johnny was there right before the explosion. The real sweet spot for Johnny as a manager came later in the WWF. He managed a team called the Dream Team, Greg the Hammer Valentine and Brutus Beefcake. Under Johnny's watch, they became champions. On August 24, 1985, they beat the US Express for the WWF Tag Team titles. Fans loved to hate them. Their matches with the British Bulldogs were some of the best tag team fights of the mid-80s. Eventually, the Bulldogs took the titles at WrestleMania 2, but by then the Dream Team had already left their mark. Johnny kept moving. He managed Dino Bravo for a stretch. He managed the first version of Demolition before the team took off with other managers. Later, in the AWA, he worked with the Destruction Crew and helped them win Tag Team Gold. Everywhere he went, Johnny found a way to matter. What made him stand out wasn't just who he managed, it was how he managed. He could make average wrestlers look like stars. He would strut down the aisle, run his mouth, and instantly get the crowd fired up. People paid money just to see him get embarrassed or silenced. That was the magic of Johnny Valiant. His voice was such a weapon that it eventually landed him at the commentary table. Wrestling broadcasts always had two kinds of voices. One was the straight announcer who called the action. The other was the heel commentator, the one who sided with the bad guys and bent the truth to defend them. Johnny slid into that role with ease. He was quick, funny, and never ran out of ways to annoy fans while still keeping the show entertaining. This move showed how smart Johnny was. He wasn't clinging to wrestling because he had nowhere else to go. He made deliberate choices. He knew his body couldn't take endless bumps anymore, but he also knew his voice and personality could carry him just as far. He didn't burn out, he adapted. When his last run in the AWA wrapped up, Johnny started to ease into semi-retirement. For most wrestlers, that would mean autograph signings and telling old stories at conventions. For Johnny, it meant starting a whole new career. He jumped into acting and stand-up comedy. At first, it might sound like a big leap, but really, wrestling had trained him for it. He already knew how to work a crowd, how to tell a story, how to hold people's attention. Comedy and acting were just new stages for the same skills. He landed real acting work. He appeared on The Sopranos. He showed up on Law and Order. People who had no idea who Johnny Valiant the wrestler was got to see Johnny Valiant the actor. For a guy who had spent so many years in the wrestling ring, it was proof that his talent could stretch further than anyone expected. His favorite project, though, was his one-man show called An Evening with Johnny Valiant. It was just him on stage. No tag team partner, no wrestler to hype, no announcer beside him. He told stories, cracked jokes, and opened up about his life. He mixed humor with honesty. He gave people a piece of himself. Critics in New York praised it. Publications like Time Out New York and The Village Voice gave him glowing reviews. For Johnny, it was validation that he wasn't just a wrestler trying something new. He was a true performer who could succeed anywhere. The show revealed a different side of him. Wrestling had given him wild stories and larger-than-life moments. But what made the show work was how personal he made it. He wasn't hiding behind the luscious Johnny character anymore. He was Thomas Sullivan, the guy who had lived through it all, sharing his experiences in a way that made people laugh and connect with him. And then came the ending nobody saw coming. On April 4th, 2018, Johnny was crossing McKnight Road in Ross Township. It was early morning, around 5:30. A pickup truck hit him. He wasn't in a crosswalk. The driver stayed, talked to the police, and cooperated. It was ruled an accident, nothing more. He was rushed to Allegheny General Hospital, but they couldn't save him. At 71 years old, Johnny Valiant was gone. The irony is hard to miss. This was a man who had survived decades of wrestling. He wrestled in brutal territories, took endless hits, and lived on the road. He made it through all of that, only to lose his life in a random traffic accident on an ordinary street in his hometown. Looking back at the life of Johnny Valiant, or Thomas Sullivan as he was born, you can't help but see a man who never stopped finding new ways to shine. His story wasn't about being stuck in one lane or just holding on to old glories. It was about reinvention, resilience, and always knowing how to keep an audience hooked. He started in the tough wrestling territories of the 60s and 70s, grinding it out in small arenas where the crowds were rowdy and the paychecks weren't much. He learned the business from the bottom up. He set up rings, refereed matches, and wrestled night after night just to get noticed. Most people would have quit under that kind of pressure, but not him. He stuck it out, and that patience paid off. The big turning point came when he teamed up with Jimmy Valiant. Together they became the Valiant Brothers, a tag team that was ahead of its time. With their bleached blonde hair, flashy personalities, and over-the-top charisma, they gave fans something totally different. They weren't just wrestling, they were putting on a show. That style would later grow into what people now call sports entertainment. But Johnny and Jimmy were laying the foundation long before it was a household phrase. Their tag team title run, which lasted over a year, cemented their place as legends of the era. But what made Johnny special was that he didn't stop there. After he was done wrestling full-time, he didn't fade into the background. Instead, he reinvented himself again. He took on the role of manager, and this is where his gift of talking really came into play. Whether it was managing Hulk Hogan early on or leading the Dream Team to championship gold in the WWF, Johnny knew how to make his guys look like stars. His swagger, his mouth, his timing. It was all part of the magic. Fans might have booed him, but deep down they loved every second of it. And when management ran its course, he found yet another lane. He slid into commentary, adding humor, wit, and that classic villain's view to broadcasts. Once again, he kept himself relevant by leaning on what he did best: talking, entertaining, and connecting. Even after wrestling, Johnny refused to let the curtain fall. He went into acting and comedy, proving once again that performance was in his blood. He showed up on TV shows like The Sopranos and Law & Order, surprising people who had no idea about his wrestling background. His one-man show, An Evening with Johnny Valiant, earned praise from critics and showed just how natural he was at telling stories and making people laugh. It's no wonder he was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 1996. That honor wasn't just about his time as a wrestler, but about everything he represented: a trailblazer, a showman, someone who pushed wrestling forward in a way that still matters today. His peers remembered him not just as a performer, but as a kind, witty man who always had time for others. The saddest part of his story is how it ended. After everything he survived in wrestling, the brutal matches, the travel, the grind of the road, his life was cut short in a random accident in his hometown. It was tragic and unfair, but it doesn't erase what he built. Johnny Valiant's real story isn't about how he died. It's about how he lived. It's about a man who kept moving forward no matter what. From wrestler to manager, from commentator to actor and comedian, he proved that true talent never fades. It just finds new ways to shine. His legacy is one of adaptation, endurance, and the pure joy of entertaining people. And that's what makes him unforgettable. Don't forget to like the video, drop a comment with your favorite Johnny Valiant memory, and subscribe so you never miss another wrestling story like this one.